I want to welcome you to the New Jersey School Boards Association, and in particular, want to welcome you to this particular seminar. My name is Larry Feinsod, and I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey School Boards. And as you know, our association played a major role in the tragedy of Hurricane Sandy. One of the things that I asked our staff to do, and they said, Larry, I don't think it's possible. And I said, let's think possible. Let's think we can do it. And you know what? They did. They were terrific. What did they do? They personally contacted 586 districts. Personally contacted 586 districts. Either they contacted a member of the board, the superintendent, a principal, the business administrator. Someone was contacted by our organization in every district in the state. We asked how they were doing, how did the hurricane affect them. We also told them that we were going to give them help. And we had almost 200 donors lined up with most of the schools, individual schools, and school districts that were affected in the state of New Jersey. And the donors that we got together were as far away as California and other West Coast areas, if you will, and as close as 4 or 5 communities away. We had teachers raising money in Oregon. We had principals in California working to see if they can send certain computer material to a district, and we had kids raising money in parts of New Jersey. So I was very proud of our staff and very proud of what they did. As a New Jersey educator, I was also proud of the people you're going to hear from today in terms of their incredible efforts to try to correct the horrible conditions that affected so many of our children in the state. I think some of you, or many of you, may have been at other seminars that we've had and that other organizations have had. And I think one of the things that we see that kind of goes through it all is the fact that New Jerseyans, especially people in the education community, whether they're a board member, a teacher, a superintendent, a principal, and all the other titles we have in education, really came together for kids and for families. And we also salute the state police. We have 2 officers with us today. They've come to other things that the School Boards Association has given, and we also don't want to forget their hard work and their dedication as well. So, Ray, do you want to take over at this point and get things going? I think most of you know Ray Pinney, our Director of Training, and Ray wears many hats here actually, and is responsible for getting this off the ground, and we thank him for that. Okay?
I don't need to videotape the exchange of microphone. As Larry said, I had to deal with a lot of the superintendents. I emailed them and had conversations with a lot of them. I think running a school district, being a school administrator of any sort, is a really hard job. And it's really even almost impossible when Mother Nature is fighting you. And I remember talking to one of the superintendents, and he's not here today, but he said, you know what, Ray? I didn't learn any of this in superintendent school. This was not anything that I was really trained for. And the idea behind this, and this is not just a one-time event, is to share these experiences so that you can, those who maybe were lucky this last time, may not be so fortunate another time, can start to learn some of the lessons that you will have to deal with. And Walter from Brick had said, I'm prepared now, not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. And I think that's a mindset that we all have to get into. So I'm actually looking forward to this discussion. these are not the only educators who went through a lot. There's a lot here, and I think there's probably a couple in the audience. But I think they do stand out. I think it's really, I think Larry said, you're proud of education when you have people like this who are leading your school districts. And really, it's a focus on the kids. I know sometimes we feel like we're, under attack in education, but when push came to shove, everyone really stood up. And it wasn't just the people in those districts, the administrators that are here, it was people from across who sent those donations. So I think it really speaks well for the education community in and of itself. What we're going to have is we're going to have 2 panels of 3, and they'll tell their story. I'll ask them a few questions. If you want to ask a question or two, you'll see a lot of themes popping up, at least in terms of communication and working cooperatively with other entities. So it'll be a little interactive. We'll be recording this. We'll be posting on our website. And then for those who are attending here, we'll also have your email address. There's some information that we can send to you after this from our presentation. Before we start, if you look on your agenda, the first panel will be David Hallman from Belmar, the superintendent, Lisa Hanna from the principal from Belmar, and Walter Uzinski, the superintendent from Brick. Before we bring them up, I'm going to show I think it's a little over a 6-minute video from Belmar that was on PBS.
Now a report on the recovery from the Superstorm Sandy. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said today he intends to ask the federal government for at least $30 billion in aid. New Jersey is still tallying its losses, and damages in the region are expected to exceed $50 billion. Schools officially reopened today in one community along the Jersey Shore, but for the past week, teachers have already been hard at work helping students deal with the aftermath of the storm. Special correspondent John Telenko of Learning Matters filed this story from the town of Belmar.
Hurricane Sandy tore into Belmar, New Jersey.
Belmar was one of the towns you would continually hear about on the radio. Families reported seeing a 4, 5, 6 foot wall of water. How are you?
Lisa Hanna is assistant principal at Belmar's one elementary school. Many of her students are recent immigrants, and most of their families had nowhere else to go.
I don't think anyone was really prepared for what happened.
Inside this house, 3 children and their parents were counting on luck.
They stayed through the storm, and very quickly the water came up into the room. They started to climb up on furniture. It was dark, there was no power, and water is rapidly rising.
All communication to the area was lost.
I'm Lisa Hanna.
It wasn't until a week later that Principal Hanna and a group of teachers were allowed into the hardest hit neighborhoods.
Ah! Got that, Jill? And this is getting soggy.
To check on their students.
Hola, ¿cómo está? How you doing, honey? Good. Good. What do you need?
And warned them of a nor'easter that was coming in fast.
The apartment upstairs, he said there's...
Apartment up here?
Upstairs.
There are still a lot of families that don't have anywhere to go. They're staying in their homes, even though this is, I believe, day 10 of no power and no heat. Families have no way to communicate. They may not have extended families that they can go out and say, I'll stay with. And some of our families don't have reliable transportation.
Okay, how are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah.
We have warm blankets. You need more blankets?
I think so. Look at the
Yes? Is it cold? Here, more blankets. Okay.
Today we tried to get a list of what people needed so we could go back and drop supplies off if they're still staying where they are.
Leche.
Okay, all right.
Somos dos familias.
2 families. Okay, yep. Okay. So we need water, milk, and bread.
Visits from their teachers carried special significance for children.
When they see us on their front doorstep knocking and they realize it's us and we're here to see if they're okay, their faces lit up.
We have blankets, nice warm blankets. Maybe one more.
In a time like this where kids are scared and you see it in their eyes, the more people they have around them that they are familiar with and that they know care about them can only positively impact them.
Would you like us to come back and get you for lunch today for the kids? We can bring them down for lunch.
Okay.
Yes? Okay, about an hour. We'll pick you up. So we'll see you at lunchtime. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
The school was opened for lunch for the first time since Sandy.
Stay with me. It's a little wet on the floor.
The building hadn't been damaged, but the power was out. About 15 families arrived nonetheless for a free meal and a chance to reconnect with friends.
Muy caliente.
Kids seek comfort and structure. And we want to restore as much normalcy and routine as possible. A little girl, when we opened up the school for lunch today, she was walking in the dark because the lights weren't on. She said, "Oh, I'm so happy to be back at school. I feel so safe."
Hot soup wasn't the only thing being served.
We just grab baskets of books and let the kids grab books. We try and sneak in, if we can, a little bit of education.
One Sunday morning, the warm sun came up and pop!
The lunch was a success for the 50 children who came, but 550 were enrolled here before the storm.
And what is this?
I think there's a real sense of unknown for us, and I'm sure a real sense of unknown for the students as well. We'll need to have our, crisis intervention in place and our school counselor and school psychologist. This is going to be a long, ongoing effort.
But after 10 days in the dark, things started looking up.
Is that power or generator? Yeah, that's the power. It's not generating. This is good. It's ahead of schedule, so that's a positive sign.
With power restored, plans could move forward to reopen the school, and that should speed the recovery.
If we're up, parents can attend to what they need to do. They're dealing with cleanup of their homes, making calls to insurance companies and FEMA. We have families that have been very significantly impacted and yet are still here.
As for the family trapped inside their home, the water rising, they lost all their possessions, but not their lives. A boat came by and carried them to safety.
Out of those 550 students in Belmar Elementary, all but 27 were back in school today. School officials are trying to contact and locate those 27 who were not. The teachers were back as well, although many have still not returned to their homes.
What we're going to do is I'm going to have each one of them tell a little bit of the story. You already saw some of the story of Belmar. Actually, I was taken back. It seems so long ago to a certain degree, doesn't it? We almost forget, especially if you're not in an area where you were affected as much, you forgot how rough it was. Even for people who weren't affected that much, we lost power for a while. But to me, it took me back when I saw that video, and I want to see how they're doing now, because I know it's an ongoing. What we'll do is, but we'll start with Walter first, the superintendent Brick, and I'm going to ask you to describe your district a little bit too.
Sure.
And give a brief outline of what you had to experience.
Good. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Brick Township is 26 square miles. We have 10,000 students. We have 144 buses. We have 1,700 employees. When Superstorm Sandy was coming, we had the opportunity to gather together in our OEM, Office of Emergency Management team. I want to say I'm really proud of the entire Brick Township because we had probably 35, 40 members of the OEM team, particularly the mayor and the chief of police, who spearheaded the entire campaign. And just prior to it coming in, we tried to cover from A to Z anything and everything that we could to be prepared for the worst. And thank God we did. We did miss a lot, and we've learned a lot since of things that we have to consider for, God forbid, one ever again, it should come. But it was very important, and one of the key things was the communication. Communication was key because we had 400 students displaced throughout the district, all the way from Manahawk and all the way to Hudson County. One of the key things that the Board of Education and I felt was important was we had to bring stability back into the families and to the kids. And one of the nurturing and warm environments that we felt they could have was that to bring back into school. This is their family away from families. I want to say that it was remarkable because we were able to do that. We have 144 buses in our district, and we have our own bus drivers. It was very trying just prior to the storm because, as I said, with the OEM, we set up where we had our garage with our maintenance people. We had maintenance people there 24/7. We had our head of the garage because we have our own gas pumps with a generator. So we provide the gas with a shared service with the township. So all the emergency vehicles were being pumped gas through our school district. Our own buses, because they used all of our buses to either block off highways to pick up senior citizens. Various things they needed our buses for. The OEM meetings ran from, I would get there at the next day after the storm because they actually sent a truck out to get me because I used to live on the bay. I live in the bay now. But I didn't do anything. My wife was ready to divorce me because I left the house at 7 in the morning, returned at midnight for 2 weeks, 7 days a week, to try to get everything back together in the community and also in our school district. But we have 13 buildings. So we lost like 1,000 homes were in the bay that fell into the bay. We had children that were all over. How are we going to get these kids back? Senior citizens that had to be picked up. The remarkable thing, though, that we put all of this in place was that the day after the storm, we had our football team, we had probably 24 teachers, administrators, the National Honor Society, I'm trying to think who else. There was a whole group of kids came on their own and wanted to help. So we said, sure. So what we did was we loaded up buses with whatever supplies we had at the time. We were getting supplies in prior to the storm, and the township allowed us to load up buses, and we sent the kids to the towns just like Belmar did, and going around to see what kids needed. And we had it right there on the bus. So we were able to give supplies out immediately to those that were devastated. We also had 2 of our buildings used as a shelter. So we were bringing people back to our school district to come into the shelter because we have 2 generators but only do small parts of the building. One of the lessons we learned from there is we are presently now putting in a generator to do one of our high schools, the whole entire high school, so that we'll be able to provide hot meals, food in the cafeterias, and would have that whole entire building. Because it was very difficult with communication. People were losing the power to their cell phones. People didn't have any place to charge their phones except at the municipal building. So we would have that opportunity, and we had small generators, but getting the information out to the people to let them know. We did through our students with the buses going around. We did it through the OEM where they were able to send it out to radio stations. So we dovetailed off of that. We never lost our internet access, and I want to thank you for contacting us. What we do is our backup, believe it or not, our backup to our internet server is in France. So we never lost any service. I didn't even realize that as superintendent that we had a backup in France. So we never lost that capability, but still parents you couldn't get to. So we did multiple. We had the children that were able to get out there with adults into the neighborhoods, and we had police escorts. I want to thank the state police because we did have them there. They were wonderful. Our local police. We had police from all the way, as you said, from Virginia and California. They were all over. And we had the National Guard. And we had to because there was a lot of looting going on, people coming by boat. And in the neighborhoods where I live, they were coming up with canoes and rowboats late at night as soon as it got dark. But the police handled that very, very well. And there was little to no crimes committed thanks to their heroics, but they were 24/7 around the clock. They were there monitoring the roadways and not letting people in or out certain roads. And where we lived, you had to show ID. And I had I lost my car. It was underwater, you know, a lot of things underwater. So the township said, no, the mayor said, he has to have a truck. Well, all the trucks are being used. My Board of Ed said, take one of our vehicles, because we have a lot of vehicles. And so I did. And it had Board of Education on the outside of the truck, but they still made me show ID each time they came down. So I want to publicly thank the state police, local police. They were phenomenal, and the National Guard. But the entire Brick Township, all the volunteers that came out. And one of the things you have to be cognizant of is the fact that the day after a storm, people come to your aid. Literally thousands and thousands and thousands of donations. And the biggest hurdle was, where do you store all that? So we staged it in one of our high schools, and we were able to get that out over the radio stations because people had old transistor radios, battery operated. They were coming. We also posted big signs all over the town on major roadways once people were able to start driving, which wasn't for at least 5 days. But we had signs to come to the high school. We gave out water and ice. We started with first. I loaded up one of the trucks and took some of the kids, and we drove around to the devastated areas giving out water and ice. You thought you were giving them $1 million. They loved it. We had local restaurants that had food. They loaded up pickup trucks. They were delivering food to the devastated areas. We loaded up the high school. I remember 11 o'clock at night, AOL came in with a huge tractor trailer, all brand new. Everything, the items were from A to Z, everything you could think of. And they sent 50 employees from New York. And we set up an assembly line loading up the high school till 1 o'clock in the morning. And I guess it was 7 o'clock the next morning, we were all there, and people were in droves were coming and just taking lanterns, lights, batteries, everything. So that was great. The 400 students that we had displaced, we're fortunate now that we did create routes. We did use our buses. We had extra drive. We did our substitute drivers. The board was committed to it. We picked up every single student. Not one student was left behind. We did have them back into school, and I'm proud and happy to say right now we're down to 27 students that are displaced. So that was great, but that was the only thing they had of any kind of stability. The pouring in of supplies, materials, and funds were amazing, absolutely amazing. And we had committees set up so that we knew what families lost everything, and we were able to give those people checks to get started too. So it was just such a big joint effort from the mayor all the way on down. But it takes everyone. It takes everyone, but it takes lots of communication. Those generators are so important in the buildings. Getting the communication out, staging an area where you can house all this, because there is so much. We used 4 of our schools to feed. We were feeding everyone, from churches coming to use our buildings to give out the food, and people were cooking. Those that had some electricity after a few days were cooking and bringing it to the schools. And we were serving lunches, breakfast, dinners, everything, all day long. But our buildings were open 24/7. And we constantly manned that with volunteers. Students, teachers, administrators, and lots of parents, PTA. Everyone was involved. You know, it was just a giant community effort. But I could not imagine how many people came to us from so far away to aid us, and without their help we couldn't have done it. But as I said, we're trying to be prepared now so that we don't lose it. And the teachers, just so you know, that after we lost 15 days of instruction, the day that I had a meeting after 4 days after Sandy, I called in all the administrators and the union heads, and we met and I put out a plan of how, when we're ready to come back, so that everything was in place. And when the kids came back and the teachers came in and the administrators came back, it was like nothing ever happened. Just the day ran just like normal. Kids were great, smiling. We kept all the activities. We didn't cancel anything. even while right after Hurricane Sandy, when the schools were closed and shut down, we kept the sports programs going. We communicated with the other schools because that gave something back to the kids. We didn't want to stop everything for the kids. Try to get as much normalcy as possible immediately. And that's what we did. And it seemed to work. Guidance counselors were on 24/7. We have that. It's still going on. There's still people that need counseling. It will probably, we suspect that it would go on probably to the end of August, maybe longer. So that's something you need to have in place right away, which we did. They were available the day after. So we contacted them and we had it staged and we got messages out at what buildings they were there. But that is still going on, and the children need it as much as the adults. So that's a critical component part of it. With that, that's pretty much, that's it.
I have
for now.
some questions to ask you.
Sure.
David, do you want to?
First, Ray, I'd like to thank you for inviting us here today. School boards, I believe I received a call the next day after the storm, and consistently every 2 days. So when you say you may only contact 500, I would say times that by 3 or 4, because I received quite a few calls after that. So I want to thank you for your support. And as Walter said, the National Guard and the state police, if we didn't have them, especially around the beach area, I'd be real concerned for the safety of some of our students, so thank you. I'm actually glad I was interviewed for that piece as well, but I had a wool hat on, I didn't shave, so I think they picked someone that looked a lot better. She's more articulate than I am as well, so I've learned in leadership to find people that are more talented than you, to keep them close to you. So Lisa will probably talk more than me, but I want to share some things with you. One of the common threads, we do have some differences, in fact. Brick is obviously a lot larger than Belmar. We have 570 students. But the one thing you're talking about consistently is communication. And whenever I speak to teachers after they come back from a workshop, I talk to them, what did you get from the workshop that you can use immediately? And I just have some simple things that I can probably give to you that we didn't think of beforehand. We were lucky enough to have our email system on Gmail, so we were not dependent on a server. I have some friends that are superintendent, and that was very challenging for them. So I would recommend some type of cloud-based or a system in France. I never heard of that before.
I was shocked.
Yeah, number one. Secondly, just by luck, we had a few different cellular providers. Verizon was working. AT&T was not. I probably shouldn't say that with companies, but we're not going to change that because we think in the future it might be the opposite. So it's good for your administration to have different cell providers. So if there's a communication problem that you're using your smartphone, that one administrator can use that other than another. Always have gas in your, my neighbor had it, I did not, in your garage, because you can, if you have a plug into your phone, you can, without electricity, you can sit in your car, which I did, plugged in, and just kept pouring gas into my car to be able to communicate with people. So these little things that seem small are real important when it comes down to an emergency. Secondly, I would probably recommend that you know of friends outside of the particular area and what type of internet service they have. So if you do have Gmail or some way to communicate that's in a cloud-based, that you can go to different people to use their computers to communicate. The Belmar story, really, the way it started was the mayor, Mayor Doherty, weeks before, or I should say a week before the storm, consistently we had a meeting. 8 o'clock, I think it was, in the morning, and 5 o'clock at night. So we could count on that communication, and we kept that through the storm when we had 2 weeks of no power. So that's something I would recommend as well. And the way that we were able to respond in the fashion that we did was kind of by luck. I established a faculty meeting I think it was the day after the storm or the following day, a teacher from a previous school district emailed me and said, "What can I do to help?" And I just thought, well, you know what? If there's people that are willing to help, then not just our staff. Then I invited some other districts that went across Facebook, and we had 100 staff members from all over the local area to help. The one probably mistake that we made was when the teams came in, we made our teams a little bit too large. As you can see, the team that was going out with Lisa, they were more 3 or 4 in a team. We were thinking 10 because there's going to be a need to move things and to help people. It's better to have small teams and then with communication add teams to go to locations, because a lot of times when we were going to places, whether it's to clean out homes or to give them supplies, there were times where we went out and there was no one there. So if you send small teams out of 3 to 5 and then communicate, I was at town hall with the mayor and the council, and they had their own volunteer organization, and I was with them, and Lisa and I were communicating. Those are some things that we learned, and I'd like Lisa to communicate now maybe a little bit about the response, but also the recovery that we're still working on today.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is to redeem the bad hat head that I had. Poor fashion,
It'll look
but
great.
who would have known,
It'll
right?
look
Thank
great.
you, Walter. You know, the PBS piece really kind of tells our story of that time, the week after the storm, and the new normal is what we're living in for many of us now. You know, what we used to use our crisis response teams for were more localized issues, issues dealing with, you know, tragedy in the community, deaths in school, school violence, and other more anticipated types of events. Our crisis response team now has to maintain an ongoing assessment of students who were impacted by the storm. And that impact in a small community like Belmar, or even the larger communities, are not just the students who were displaced. We had approximately 10% of our student population were a single attendance school district. We had about 43 students displaced. But for the community at large, even students who weren't touched personally by the storm, the whole landscape of the town was changed. And if you grew up in this town and you went to the beach, as most of our students do, especially 5th grade and older, will head up in the nice weather to the beach, the boardwalk, the playgrounds up there. And although our facility remained intact because of where our central location away from these bodies of water, the rest of the community was just devastated. So everybody was touched in one way or another, and they lost a lot of memories. Even if they didn't lose their home or parts of their home, they lost a lot of memories. And that's something that we had to really look at, and looking at signs of trauma with children across the board in the school. And from the youngest to the oldest, we had children who were showing signs of trauma. So continuing where we are now from October 29th through March 22nd today, we have a continual assessment of our students, continual needs assessments with our family. We began with a needs assessment the week after the storm. We brought the families into the school. FEMA representatives met with us, our local government officials met with us, and we tried to just provide as much information for outreach to the families in those early days in the storm. But now that's ongoing. So we have, I think we're at our 4th needs assessment and disbursement to families. And we look at our needs assessment a little bit different than the towns and some of the other government assessments, in that we have families that may have returned to their homes, but they are in a phase of restoration that is by no means normal. So they may be living in the upstairs of their home, the downstairs are still ripped apart, no floors, but because it was important for them to return to their home, make sure that their children were walking district, they wanted their children to be able to walk to school and have their friends and peers close by and return to their sports programs things of that nature. They're by no means living in the stability that they were living in prior. So we're maintaining that communication with families to see where are you. We have still so much outreach from other districts, and Walter talked about these donations of supplies, which we had to cut off at some point because you just don't have we don't have the room to store. We are one school with a board office, and we had one room that filled up. We're still trying to get that room emptied out. So we had to quickly convene a storm relief committee, our SRC, and that is also one of our committees that will remain intact because as we're hearing, the theme is it's not if it happens again, but when it happens again in these severe weather incidences. So we'll keep that committee intact, and part of that committee's charge is to look at what do our community members need, what do our students need, what do our families need on an ongoing basis. And we're still getting in gift cards, and we're still getting in donations, and so these needs assessments have to be ongoing and seeing what families need. Yeah, the lessons that we learned, in addition to the most important ones that David talked about, is now we have an opportunity to be ready the next time. And we thought we were ready, and we did all the things that we knew we had to do. We met with OEM, and we met with our local government officials, and we were really prepared as best we could be. But until you go through this, you don't know all the things you're not prepared for. And so we developed an emergency readiness plan that speaks specifically to natural disaster. And we used FEMA, the ready.gov website. We used any of the sites on the Homeland Security website, and all those sources are in here, and this document is available for you. Basically what this document tells us, at the end of a school year prior to hurricane season, not in September, but in June, we'll collect this information beginning this June. And the information we need are basic demographics, who you are, who your children are, how old they are, what are your telephone numbers, who are your cellular providers, do you have internet, who are your internet providers. If you had to evacuate your home, where would you go? What is the address? And if you were staying, are there any special needs that we would need to know about? Medical, health issues. We have students with disabilities that possibly parents are saying, we will not leave our home. They can't leave their home. One of the questions is, do you have transportation if you were required to evacuate? And then there's an extra additional space for them to add in any comments that would be helpful for us to know. Why are we gathering this in June rather than September? That gives us the summer to really develop a plan that we can organize and categorize where our families would go, who we know we could contact. If Verizon's up, we know that these families that we might have 60% of our families with Verizon, we know we can hit them. And it just gives us a lot of ready information to prepare prior to that August, September beginning of the season. So this is an important form, and we're hoping that we'll get a big return rate when we send these out in June. So the other thing that we did establish was an email address at the school that will be available for parents that do have cloud-based technology and can email back and forth in the event that school was closed. So we now have emergency response at Belmar K-12 NJUS, which again, the new normal. We've stepped up our social media. We're getting ready to roll out Facebook and Twitter, which we didn't have before. So a lot of one-way communication pushes that we now realize are not just for your standard statuses of school and everyday information, but might be very important. So hopefully if you have 6 or 7 channels of communication, you're going to be able to hit everybody at some point in the event of another natural disaster. That's pretty much speaks to where we are, and a lot of hard lessons learned. I think the piece that we all have in common is that we recognized more than ever the importance of schools, and that schools are such a central focus of our children's lives and our students' lives. And when everything else is unsure around them, the school is still a source of safety and stability and routine. And the quicker we could get that building open for students, even if it was in the dark with some daylight and some hot soup and meals that are outsourced food services brought in for us, it was a feast for these students at that time. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions, and I'll open it up to the audience if anyone else has any questions for them. Walter, you had 400 displaced students, and you did bus routes. To me, is that an additional cost that you didn't have in your budget?
That's correct. What we did was, it was a Sunday morning, and I called out over 200 bus drivers, and we sat down so that they would understand what we were doing and what we were planning on doing for the entire district, so that everyone was on board and no one was left out. That's the communication part that's very important. Prior to that, the head of transportation I met with to start with, we have Versatran, which is a computer system that we used to start setting up all our bus routes. At that point in time, though, we had to keep a log of all the substitute drivers, the gasoline. You have to keep a log of everything that's going to cost because it's quite expensive. FEMA, who used our buildings for umpteen meetings that we kept going on just like there. When you're dealing with a larger district, it's very difficult. So we were using more of the radio to get out and let people get to us where they're going to be and what's happening, because they were able to tell us, because they didn't even know where they were going, because there wasn't places to go. All around us was devastated. So what they did was, with the buses, we kept that track. FEMA said that there's a possibility we'll get reimbursed. Well, we're now months away, and it's still, there's a possibility. So we don't know. I know there is a grant out there for $1.5 million. I was on the phone the other day with the State Department saying, well, we have all of these districts, 300 districts have applied for it, and they're putting in $1, $2, $3 million. So how are you going to separate $1.5 million? So they said they're going to take whoever applied, divide it into 1.5, and that's what you're going to get. In the meantime, we put in a large number also. So it had to come out of our funding, and you know, we're still looking at how we're going to be paying. We've paid for it already, and it's tough because ratables are down. We don't have homes. People aren't paying taxes. We don't know where it's going. So the cost is exorbitant. So you have to be cognizant of, if you have a number of buses, what you're going to do.
Yeah, Ray Perkins from Union.
Right.
Did you use your buses for evacuations, and if you did you use your drivers for evacuations, to evacuate people?
Yes, sir, we did. In cooperation with the township, when they would contact us, I would contact transportation, and we would bring our drivers in. So drivers were on call, and we sent them out, and what would have is a police officer would be there when we were getting into the area where we were evacuating people.
And what kind of logs did they keep? I mean, one of the things in my experience a long time ago was that you have to really keep good records.
Yes, sir.
Who's doing what to whom? And you had a central thing? Did you do this on the computer? I mean, how did you?
We did it on computer through our garage. We have a central garage station where we have a person in charge that manned the phones for whatever communication they needed. The OEM would contact me, and I would contact the garage. That's where we warehoused it there. We have our pumps that are computerized. So every time a car or truck would come in, or a bus, it was how many gallons, what was there, and what was being used. Yes, sir. So that was done. And we also had mechanics on duty. So all of that timesheets were kept, because they were there 24/7 for two solid weeks, because they were repairing the buses, they were repairing township vehicles, people that were coming in from out of state. If something happened to their vehicle, we were repairing that. So it was very extensive. But so that's why I say, well, from 7 in the morning till roughly midnight, the police, the state police, everyone was, we had 5, 6, 7 meetings a day. Sometimes I'd leave a meeting, an hour later I'd get a call, come back for another meeting. But the communication was key. But record keeping, you must keep those accurate records, because they keep asking for it, and we send it, and then they ask for it again. So all I could tell you, well, yeah, right, you know who we work for. But the record keeping is key. It's key, because also they want you to equate, like our buses that we used for blocking off highways. They actually barricaded because people couldn't get around to save for the traffic. We naturally were not using any drivers, but the fuel to get there and back, we had to clock the mileage and document that. So documentation, documentation, documentation.
How did you decide on who decided to use the buses, and did they work through you?
Yes, the OEM and I, when I was at meetings, they asked, because every single organization in the township was asked of, would you do this, would you do this, can you do that? So when I first met with the OEM, I was asked, we may need your buses, we need your pumps, we need your fuel, can we use your mechanics, can we use your buildings? We have 2 shelters, they set the shelters up, they brought in the cots, they brought in the blankets, the generators had to go on. We did find out one thing. Another district I was at, every month we used to turn on our generators to check. Well, one of our generators was not turned on to be checked. And when we went to turn it went on and off, on and off. So we had a problem with that one. But we did have 2 other generators, one high school and one of our middle schools. So we housed a couple hundred people and senior citizens there in our schools and children, which was great. I mean, if I could just sidebar, we had I'm a Giant fan. And we had the New York Giants at our school district. We had 9 of them there, and they gave out toys to all the children in the district. A room this size that would have filled this whole entire room right to the top. You wouldn't be able to get people in, of the donations, and I know I shouldn't say the names, so I won't say where they were donated from. But they donated all these toys to these kids, and the kids were able to come in. They opened up doors. They didn't know the Giants were going to be, their eyes lit up. And then when they came in, they saw all these toys, and they were able to go around with a Giant player and pick out any toys that they wanted. So they were in awe. So I tell you, the things that went on is phenomenal. We had over 250 ambulances the day after on site. We had 2 hospitals set up, portable hospitals that were set up on our site, on our school sites, ready for anything. They could have done operations, anything at all, any kind of medical emergency. We had close to 250 fire departments, fire trucks that were available, because they put out over 1,000 fires in 2 days. Because what was happening was, when they tried to energize the power, houses were going up on fire. I know in the area I live on the water, it was the same thing. They couldn't give us power because they were afraid of people that use it as a second home. If they energized the salt water inside of the meters, could start to fire in the house. So they had to go to each individual home. So that's why I said it is a huge monumental task. Whether you're in a small district or a large district, there are so many things to be cognizant of. And without those volunteers, we would never been able to do it. Next day, we started serving food at the PAL program at 2 of our schools. And I couldn't believe the line of people that came. It was amazing. But the communication's key, as superintendent and the principal had said. And like I said, we were using the radio stations. And that helped, because, and signs just up and down the street. We did have our communications, but people didn't have cell phones. Their phones were dead. My car was underwater. So I come out and I go to try to plug in my thing. There's nothing's working. The car's dead. And, you know, and when the water came in, the water was loaded with gas and oil. So when the bay and the ocean met, and then we got it from all the boats that were sunk and displaced, the water's loaded with gas and oil. The smell was horrendous. Couldn't even breathe. So it was not just the water. There was a lot of issues we had to deal with. So boats just spewed all over the highways, the roadways. You couldn't get through. It was really trying. It wasn't pleasant, and like as I said. But please, yes, I apologize. I went long-winded, but
okay.
It is key to keep those records.
David and Lisa, I know you have a good relationship with your municipality. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because you said you met with them a week before the storm. So I guess you were watching it and you were being proactive?
Yeah. Matt, Mayor Doherty, has children in the school, so that's a nice relationship that we have.
That's a good one.
But right from the beginning, because I did not have experience with OEM in the past, so the week prior, 2 or 3 times a day, I was meeting with the committee and really just listening to everything that was going to happen, quite impressed with how everything was organized. And then from time to time they would say, can we use your building? Can we use this? How can we communicate this to the families that, you know, your Latino population? How can we use your communication, the ways that we communicate to them in Spanish? It really is just, I would say, based upon his leadership and just inviting me into the meetings was what was important, and we've established that we've kind of become very close to everyone at Borough Hall because of the challenges of the storm. So we feel very lucky that we have that relationship with our town.
You were used as a shelter. A couple of your buildings were,
Yes,
and
sir.
then you stated that you're going to improve it by having at the high school. What are the issues with being a shelter? Who decides? Who's in control of the shelter? Is it the school district? Is it the? Okay, that was a good question.
Yes, sir. They call the superintendent and say, this is what we need, here you go. Here's your cots, here's your blankets. Go ahead.
And they is the OEM?
OEM. They were wonderful. Just like the superintendent's saying, Mayor Acropolis is phenomenal. He has kids in the school, his wife teaches in the school district, but he and the chief of police were wonderful. And we did coordinate, but they would say, we have a tractor trailer load here, where do we go? So then I would get on the phone with Buildings and Grounds, or he would be with me, and we coordinated together to get our custodians. We had to bring custodians in. They were also brought in 24/7. We had shifts going, and the Army Reserve that was there, they came over and they assisted us. So they said, we have people here, you just tell us what you want. So in coordination with myself and maintenance, we then would set up the cots, we set up the, we had water out there for them, we had coolers with ice in it, we had goodies for them, and so forth. So it was a coordinated effort, but they kind of depend on the superintendent to see, here, do what you have to do. And our staff was wonderful. They came to it. If I may, too, what was very important for those of you that are putting plans in place, at the municipal building, we had a room about this size with 24 phones that were manned 24/7. And I had given them information, a list of all the information, so that if any parent were to call, they would just look at that list and they had A to Z, all the information that they had to give to and then they kept records for us, so that each day when I was there, a number of times, they would hand me a stack, and that's how I was collecting where parents were, who called in, and what they had. But they had all the information for the school district right there. But at the municipal building, they did that immediately, and they manned those phones 24/7. So anyone that called in got immediate information, and they knew exactly where they could go, and they knew what schools we had open, where we had supplies, where we had material. So the communication was great, not only just with the radio station, but with housing all those, manning those phones.
I think that one of the things you have to think about also is who's hearing your message.
Yep.
In our district, we have almost 50% of our families from Hispanic backgrounds, non-native English-speaking backgrounds, and probably in many of your communities, there's at least a pocket of the population that are non-native English-speaking. And this was one of the issues we were dealing with the mayor and council. Their code red, their global alert that goes out in English. Over the past 2 years, we've created a system through an app on our iPads where we can translate all of our messages into Spanish, and then I can just hold the phone up and it speaks. So we had to think about that, and that was one of the things that the mayor had asked us to do, because they didn't have that set up, and you're trying to do these things in a very quick way to be responsive. So we would take those messages that he was sending out on the code red through town, and then we would also send them out to our school, to our students, plus the sending district of Lake Como, which Belmar was not hitting. Their township was. Mm-hmm. So it was just this continual, who's hearing it, and are they able to get that message?
Our message was in 9 different languages.
Wow.
Already pre-done.
Okay,
We did it prior to the storm.
I do have a question. You mentioned in the video, you try to sneak in some education.
That was cute.
Now,
I
you lost a lot of education time, a lot of days, How was the educational component of this? Because that it looked like it was hard just to get people into the
Sure.
kids into the school and get things back to normal.
Sure.
Was there an educational impact on the students?
Yes, I think that you'd be foolish to think that there's not going to be some regression during that time, because you're not even talking about a summer regression where everything is status quo. You're talking about students who are now not living in their home, dealing with trauma. So they're being impacted from a lot of different areas that's just really intensifying that regression. So that was why it was important for us to try to get them in the school and try to put some of those routines and rituals in place academically, even if it was just leveled reading and familiar teachers coming in and reading to them and asking some of those key questions and things that they would do in a classroom. And then, it was interesting when the day before we officially opened, we opened on the 12th, the Friday prior, we put together a modified day. I believe we had power on that day that came on the night before. We really weren't sure if it was stable at that point. And so we put together a modified day of, I believe, 4 hours. Our staff came in and we put up sort of centers throughout the whole school. We didn't know who would show up. So we said, we're going to have to take this as it comes. And let's set up centers in the gym, learning centers in the media center, and a variety of activities, and we'll see who comes. Well, I think we planned it from 9:30 to 1:30. By 8:30, the staff was there, and students were just pouring into the building.
We had about 85% of our staff there.
Yeah.
And what about 60% of our
I would say about
students?
60% of the
60,
students,
yeah.
and not one discipline referral that day. So
They were so happy
They were
to
so
be
happy
back,
to be
and
back.
it was just so moving as saw the students in the video, how happy they were to see us when we went to their homes. It was great.
Does anyone have any questions? I do have one more. Were there any additional costs that the district had to take on? I know we talked about transportation, and I'm sure you're still dealing with FEMA.
Oh, yes.
That's a relationship that may be ongoing even longer than any other relationship. But
We compared to the larger districts and Union Beach and whatnot, we didn't have much damage to the school. We also, most of the personnel costs, the teachers were there, obviously volunteering. So we were lucky in that way. We also had the town that was giving us money, and that was its own committee too, how we would disperse that money to our families, how we would make that decision. So in terms of costs, we were lucky in Belmar that it wasn't much.
and anything else? I mean, I know you've had a lot of issues.
We have the cost of fuel, the drivers, the maintenance people that were in because they were in on time. So we have a lot of staff overtime that we put in. The crisis counselors that were there and still continuously are there and after school. So it's an ongoing expense, and we do keep track of it and we have it logged, and we are in constant communication with FEMA because they're still using our buildings for instructions that they give out. Now the big thing is educating people on the cost of raising your house, that we have to raise our house and pay this money, and there's grants and there's loans and there's all kinds of things that are available, but you may have to wait 7 years before you can even get a dime. In the meantime, the insurance companies are chasing us down saying, well, we're going to raise your rates if you don't raise your house, but nobody's telling us how high to raise it and where we're going to get the money to do it. So it's an ongoing battle that's going to take probably a long time. And as I said, the education is still going on through FEMA using our buildings, and there's various classes that take place continuously. But it is very, very costly, very costly.
Now you didn't have that many displaced students. I think you said 27 at this point.
Yeah, now we're down to 27 students.
Right, and you had about 400.
We have
What
400.
about next year? I mean, I know you brought a lot back, but some of them will
Some
will
of
they
our
eventually leave?
students will. Well, we have students whose families, their homes were completely razed to the ground. So we don't know their long-term plans. So, you know, at this stage, I think the families their hope and intent is to return to the district, but just like us in districts, in their personal lives, they don't know where they are with FEMA and their insurance companies, and so we're not sure where those families will be. And because this is all new for everyone, you know, we're put under the umbrella of homelessness, but we don't know. So in that, when we hit that 1-year deadline, what will be the guidance to families at that point? So that's where we are now. We began with about 10% of the district displaced, and now we're down to 27, and our hope is that by the end of the school year we'll have more information and that the majority of those students will return. But it's yet to be seen.
You had said that your displaced students, you had to go, the buses had to go and pick those displaced students up, but I'm getting from you that those displaced students you're not picking up. What is the difference? What's the difference? Like what, I mean, do you have to, I guess what I'm asking is they're homeless, so you have to go pick them up, but why don't?
Well, when I talk about costs, we have approximately 10 students that we are paying the parents to transport, and we filled out a waiver in terms of the insurance liability that each parent has to have.
You don't have your own buses, right?
We do not. We don't have our own buses.
That's why
So
I was trying to figure out, did you have to
that-
go get a bus? That's what I was trying to
we
figure
had,
out.
at first, we had families that had friends that were driving them to school, that were living actually in Brick in different areas. But at this point, since it's been so long, you know, they came, we kept going to them, you know, we can pay you for this if we do this with a waiver. And so we do have families that we are paying them and they're transporting.
And how far out do you have to go? I mean,
I wanna ask,
you said
I know you
some
have
were
some
in
students coming from
you
all
said
different-
Hudson County, and I'm like thinking, Brent, Hudson's kind of.
Yeah, we don't travel all that far, because we only have one family all the way in Hudson. But
Here's what the law had said that came down from legislators was that if your students were displaced, those students were permitted to attend any school where they were living. The school district had to take them in. So if I had somebody that was displaced from Belmar and they couldn't go to the school, like Lavalette School was completely shut down, if they wanted to come in, we had to take them. You were not allowed to. Also, you have to be cognizant of feeding the children because of free and reduced lunches. Everyone got lunch. We did not. Well, we kept logs. We kept track of it. But every single child was given a hot meal. So we made sure every child was fed. With that being said, then what we decided to do as our Board of Education, we made the commitment that we were going to pick our children up because, as she nicely said, they needed a warm, learning, comfortable environment to come back to, and the only thing they had was school, and school was their family away from home. So we wanted that stability to be brought back. So we were committed to wherever the children were, we were going to come get them. And that was the farthest we had to go. But we do go all the way to Manahawkin. So we've traveled about 60 miles and come back. So as Ray was saying, it equates to a lot of dollars. It's costly. But when you're dealing with children, and I'm too compassionate about kids, no distance was too far for us. I was determined to have those kids to have some kind of stability back in their life.
And some of our students from within town, based on our policy, I'm the only one that can drive students.
Ooh.
But I called our attorney, called our school board president, and that's where Lisa said Lisa and myself, we went to pick up students to bring them to the school. So obviously that's a liability concern, but you know, in the situation that we were in, we're a square mile, we're not as large obviously as Brick, because when you're inviting them to come to the school, there were locations they could not walk to the school, you know, 5-6 feet of water, obviously with lines down and whatnot. So mainly I would go and pick up the students and bring them, so we stuck to the policy. There were a few times where Lisa also did, but the board president was aware of that, and also we spoke to our attorney about it.
See, we're fortunate because we
Yeah,
own the buses and we have our own drivers, and the police were great because so much debris was all over, but the state police were actually escorting our buses. They would go to the areas where our buses were. Sometimes they would actually escort the bus for us. to get around because there was so much there. So that's why I say the cooperation of all the enforcements and volunteers and the community was wonderful. That made it all work. That's why it worked.
Now, if the student chose, just questions to know, if the student chose to go to another district, did you have to pay for that student to go to that district or no? No.
Not right now. We had to keep records of that.
Right.
The people that were in, the people from Hudson County, they actually went to school there. And now they're back in Brick. We found them because they were calling, asking for, so we had a line set up also for people that were looking for apartments and homes. We contacted all the realtors in the area to give us a list of anything that might be available. So when people called in, we were able to give those people numbers of where they could call to go look if you needed a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, if you needed a house to rent, whatever you needed, we had that information for them. And we were able to find a place for this lady who had 5 children, and she's now back in Brick. She said, I will not leave Brick. So.
All right, we're going to have to, oh, okay, Janet, you get the last question, because I have to move on to the next panel.
How did you make up your missed school days?
We took a couple days away from spring break, and we added the rest on to the end of the year. And also President's Day, we had a professional day built in, we took that away. So sporadically, but mostly it went to the end of the year. So they're all in there. There's all those days
And you
added
did
up.
something similar?
Yeah, we recaptured days similar to Brick Township. President's Weekend, we had the Friday, Monday, we recaptured those days. We added days to the end of the school year. We have a parent conference day that it's a staff in-service day. We were able to move conferences to as-needed basis, that parents would come in, and we recaptured that school day. So we're in fairly good shape. We'll be going to the 21st of June, I believe. And we were, you know, if winter's over, then we should be, yes, good.
All right, I want you to thank this panel. One of the board members who was at new board member orientation thinks I'm slacking off because on the weekend orientation I was on time and hard on everyone, but there was reasons for this. But we're going to get started. We're going to start with another slideshow, and this one was put together by students. Our next panelist, and I'll explain it later, but dealt with the Union Beach, and I think Union Beach was in the newspaper a lot, had a lot of media coverage. Yes. It's another short 5-minute, but I didn't even know it was put together by students, and I think it's something that you'd all enjoy.
Day of the storm, the morning before, I was evacuated by my parents, and I left them. They said they'll be all fine, so I was like, okay. So I went to my sister's house, and around 7:30, they called us, and they said that there was no flooding. So I was happy. I figured they'd be all right, because I thought there would be flooding, because our street is the worst flood zone, even when it rains. And then 8 o'clock hit, high tide, and she called us and was screaming, the water's coming in. And I was worried, and she went in the attic. And the morning after, me and my brother couldn't wait, we wanted to go see. So we walked into the water. The water was started at the beginning of my street. And when I finally got to my house, I was waist deep. And I saw my mom's face, I knew that it wasn't good. And she told us that I got in the house and walked in, and all my stuff was destroyed, all her stuff was destroyed, and it was maybe 2 feet up. And then I went in my shed where all the baby pictures were and baby videos, and they were all destroyed, and my mom started to cry. My father was crying. Thankfully, the stuff that was in the attic wasn't damaged, and the stuff that was higher up wasn't damaged, but I'm just really thankful that my family's all right, and it made us stronger. So, I mean, some things are replaceable, some things are, but our lives aren't replaceable. I'm happy that we all have that.
the storm, I was lucky to evacuate, but my parents weren't. I guess they decided to stay because of looters, or they were just nervous about how their house would be if they weren't around. The next day I came back to see how my house had done throughout the storm, and the town was completely trashed. There was houses crumbled to the ground, there was debris everywhere, there was furniture on everyone's lawns. It was completely like a war zone almost. Going through my house, I had to get rid of everything that we had due to water damage. Just everything had to go. I had to just throw out all my furniture and take my walls down and the roof and like the floors and stuff. But I think the hardest part about it was having to throw out all my personal belongings, like stuff that I can't get back, like gifts from people and letters and pictures. Also was having to see that my house is unlivable now, and the place where I live and had so many memories is now unusable and pretty much gone. And thankfully we have people that are very generous and helpful with everything to make it a lot less stressful, and we're able to keep moving on and getting stronger.
Our next three panelists have a little different story and different experiences, and I think you'll enjoy this. I was struck by Lisa had a comment, and I think it's something that all school districts should be. We have an opportunity to be ready, and I think Hurricane Sandy gave that opportunity, and I think that's part of why we're trying to do something like this. It's an opportunity to be ready for everyone, not just for the District of Belmar. With us in no particular order, have Carol Fredericks, who was she's the business administrator in Franklin Township in Hunterdon County, but at the time she was working in Hoboken School District, and previously to that, during Hurricane Irene, she was in Patterson. So I don't know if I would hire you as an addition.
Yeah.
Your track record is a little. But she'll talk about the lessons she learned. And we have Karen McKeon, who is from the Long Beach Island School District, and she has two buildings. Well, she had two buildings, and one of them that they're not using right now. And then we have Lisa Savoya, who is the superintendent in Keyport, and she's been working very closely with Union Beach, accepting their students because their building was destroyed. Carol, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It was an interesting experience when I was the business administrator of Patterson and Hurricane Irene came. That was something we were told to expect, but in Patterson, it's not near the ocean. We weren't sure whether it would really come. And while we prepared somewhat, the fact that water sat in the city nose deep for days and days and days was really something of a shock. And to go downtown, Patterson's known as Silk City. It was the home of a lot of silk mills, and it has one of the largest natural waterfalls in the country besides Niagara Falls, and the biggest in New Jersey. So if you don't know Patterson, you're thinking industrial city, where's the water? Well, that falls is something not to be messed with. And so when Irene hit, it hit Patterson hard, and the water didn't recede like the tide. It just stayed and stayed and stayed day after day. So when finally we could get back into Patterson, the water had been there long enough to start mold, to start mildew. The floorboards were buckled. And one of our schools was closed for an entire year. We had to move children. Now Patterson is a state-operated district, 30,000 children, $750 million annual budget, and you would think, well, Patterson can handle it, but it strained the financial bearing of Patterson too, because when it's not in the budget, it's just not in the budget. Yet your vendors want to be paid. So that's when I first learned about the records that needed to be kept for FEMA and for the hurricane. And that's also when I, as a sitting business administrator, had someone run into my office 6 o'clock on a Friday night and say, if we don't have these $3 million in emergency contracts from no-bid vendors, the schools are going to be ruined, it's going to be disaster. Please sign here, Dr. Fredericks. And I said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. That's a lot of money on a no-bid contract, and it's really more than I am comfortable signing my name on the bottom line, that they could possibly do that work in a weekend without a little review from some other people. So I said, I'll sign for $500,000. Let the vendors set up the staging, let them bring in their crews and their teams, and come Monday or Tuesday, we'll reevaluate this $3 million no-bid contract. So that's what we did, and as it turned out, they were able to do a lot more than they thought they could do for a lot less money. And I never did sign that $3 million no-bid purchase order. Also, it gave us the gift of time to let our people, we had an architect on staff as our facilities director who was extremely capable, but it took us time to get out to all the buildings and get vendors in and the professionals and the engineers. First we had to decide whether the buildings were safe to be in, to even fix them, and then we had to decide what repairs were needed immediately and what other repairs could take long. So, long story short, in Patterson was we recovered, and the lessons I learned were hurry up to plan and step back to implement. Just take a breath, review everything that every vendor brings you, and don't be afraid in 2 days to make another assessment, and in 2 more days to make another assessment, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to pay for this out of your pocket until insurance proceeds, FEMA proceeds, or gifts come in. And so you have to be very careful that you don't take financial things away that you will need. In Patterson, the other lesson I learned was we had many rented buildings in Patterson. And I learned that when we were relying on a landlord to fix a flood-impacted building, they did not repair it to the extent that we as a district would have repaired it. And we then, months later, had black mold growing and evacuations occurring all throughout the year because the landlords had not mitigated in the same way we would have done with public facilities. So, fast forward, after I was in Patterson and as the business administrator of Franklin, I share my services to save my district money, and Hoboken had called me to come help them out. And I was in Hoboken just in time for Hurricane Sandy to come.
Yay.
Coincidence? I think not. Anyway, we have a great facilities director in Hoboken named Tim Callaghy, and it's unusually these days a district-run operation. District personnel are the custodians, district personnel are the bus drivers, maintenance, crew on staff, And we sat down and we planned before the storm came, and we planned for, if it floods here and they say it's going to, we're going to be underwater. The phones aren't going to work. The faxes aren't going to work. The district telephones, we used voice over IP. Probably not going to work. And as it turned out, you could not call me in Hoboken because the phones didn't work for days and days, even after we opened. We did have our internet on Google, so we could, if you could get to a place where the internet worked, we could communicate with one another. So that was a good thing. But I told the story to our facilities director, and I said, Tim, I'm just going to tell you, if you can't reach me, someone's going to come up to you and say, get your business administrator to sign here. We need $2.5 or $3 million, or your buildings are going to be ruined. And I said, please, please, let's not do that. Let's only do that to the extent necessary, and let's use our people to take care of our buildings whenever we can. As it would happen, I happen to live on the bay in Atlantic City, and so my home was flooded, and I also live up in Hunterdon County in Tewksbury. Trees knocked down, power out for 2 weeks. I was homeless, but it made me feel good to go to work because at least I had my day set up, and I could certainly understand how kids would feel and how parents would feel and how much they wanted schools to be open. So even though our infrastructure didn't work, our buildings were flooded and closed, our power didn't work, and our cell phones didn't work in Hoboken, I knew the employees would want to get paid really, really badly. And we had in our employment union agreements a clause that said under bad weather conditions, the superintendent could invoke a skeleton crew clause. Now, I haven't seen that clause in many other negotiated agreements, but I was really glad it was there because we had to invoke it. So we called in business office staff when nobody else was working, and guess what? We got the payroll out. And I'd love to tell you that in Hoboken, everybody gets direct deposit, but they don't. They don't. They love that paper check. So we had to figure out how to communicate that they could walk into Demarest School. By the way, that's where Frank Sinatra went, maybe even in my office. We had to figure out how to let them know that we had their checks, that we were open for business, and that they could come pick them up. And we used email, and I wish we had Facebook, and I wish we had Twitter, and I wish we had other methods. We didn't. So we sent out our custodians on foot, knocking on doors, and we just used the old school, old-fashioned way of letting people know we'll be there at Demarest, at headquarters. We'll be there from 9 to 5. We'll be there before 9. We'll be there after 5. We'll be there until everybody gets their check. And that's what we did. And what I heard, I want to reiterate, is record keeping. Because your insurance company will reimburse you for calling that skeleton crew in. So I instructed the payroll staff to please make a spreadsheet by building of who worked in what building doing what task. And guess what? Don't just include their salary. You can also include their FICA, their pension deduction. You can choose their workers' comp. If they get health benefits, guess what? That's part of that day's work. So that formula for their hourly rate actually gets much larger when you start accounting for all of the costs of that person during that storm. Now, in Hoboken, we had 5 negotiated agreements. And of course, as in most districts, they're all a little different. So our bus drivers and our custodians thought they would get time and a half for the flood work. As it worked out, they didn't. They got, their union agreement pretty much said they got straight time. But if they worked more than 40 hours in a week, they did get time and a half. And if they worked on a holiday or a weekend, they got double time. So of course you know that we had to calculate straight time, time and a half, and double time for all those workers, because some of them work 24 hours a day, bus drivers in particular, and we had to calculate the fringes for those people, the workers' comp, the FICA, the PERS pension, the health benefits, and that's where it gets a little murky, because FEMA will allow you to count health benefits for some of the folks and not for others. So I found that I had a lot of spreadsheets going. But the best advice I can give any district in planning for any emergency, whether it's a flood or any other kind of disaster, is the business office, somebody there has to be the keeper of the spreadsheet. One person needs to have all the information. In Patterson, we found that legal had the contracts, facilities had the timesheets, payroll had payroll records, and we had to then go back and recreate for FEMA all this stuff in one place. Lesson learned in Hoboken, the business office gathered all that information together. Payroll gave their information, facilities gave their information, and from the schools we needed information. They had to go out and tell us what was ruined. Our facilities guys were analyzing the branch panels, the boilers. They were analyzing the structure, the flooring, the walls, the mold, the elevator shafts, the emergency systems, the fire alarm systems, all were breached by flood waters, and they had to work before we allowed children in. Facilities people were managing that. But what about the textbooks? We lost early childhood classrooms. What about the furniture? What about the children's supplies? We needed an inventory of all those things that were lost. So as that information came in, we would put it in the spreadsheet for that school. And we kept those spreadsheets, as I say, I heard someone say they asked for it once and then they asked for it again. I sent those spreadsheets out numerous times because the county department wanted a spreadsheet. The state homeroom had a place you went and reported your losses. FEMA wanted the spreadsheets. Our insurance wanted the spreadsheets. Our mold carrier wanted the spreadsheets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, during our planning, we did have a vendor who was a mitigation expert come, and we did let a $500,000 emergency contract in Hoboken. But we did not let a $1.5 million quote on 2 other buildings. We did it in-house. Our in-house cost to get our buildings up and running in 10 days was slightly over $85,000 in payroll costs, as opposed to $1.5 million in mitigation. So we saved our insurer and FEMA a lot of money, and we could document it. We had the written quotes, and then we had the spreadsheets clearly documenting what time we spent. We did lose a couple buses to flood waters, but we got quotes to get them up and running. And we did use our schools as shelters in both Patterson and in Hoboken. And the only problem that came with the shelters was that when we went to open the schools and allow children back in, we didn't have a secure facility from a safety standpoint. And we had to figure out a way to allow any citizen to live in the shelter part of the school, yet cordon it off and have a guard on duty so that the school part of the building was safe and and secure, and you still had to follow the protocol that you normally follow to get in a school building. In both instances, the schools were not used as shelters more than 3 weeks, so it was a very short-term problem. But again, accounting for the time to run the shelters required another spreadsheet. Then we had our food service losses. Because we had a vendor managing our food service, the vendor gave us a list of all of our food from the freezers that was bad, all of our food from the walk-ins that was bad. We said to the vendor, thanks for the list of food, we now need a list of all your employees' time throwing out the food, procuring new food, stocking it. We need a list of the hours, and by the way, we need your fringes, your FICA, your pension, your benefits. We want you to bill us so we can put that on our insurance claim. I just want to say the second time through a disaster, I did a better job. I really was hoping I wouldn't have a third time through the disaster, but what I want to say is in Hunterdon County there was no flooding, but power was out for 14 days, and what we had up there was a series of brownouts. As the power was restored in Hunterdon County, the power company just put everything on, and we had children back in the building. Then we'd lose power, then it would come on partial, then it would be on, then we'd lose power, then it would be partial, then it would be on again. We burned out our walk-in, we burned out our hot water heater, we burned out our freezer, we burned out our panels for our alarms, we burned out our panels for our elevators from power surging. And we're still discovering HVAC problems, boiler problems. Out in the country we have wells and we have septic pumps to pump the septic out to the fields. All of those things were impacted, and we think we're probably going to discover damage for the next year that we didn't realize even happened, because all of our infrastructure's failing all at once for unknown reasons. And as we call in the electricians, they're telling us, well, you know, something happened to your panel, something happened here, and we think it's from the surges. So that's something for everybody to really be aware of, because if your facilities people are coming in saying, oh, the well pump went, you normally just go fix it. But if you say, well, the well pump went, why? Well, something burned out. The panel burned out, whatever the reason is. If we can trace it back to the storm, I got 100% reimbursement on all my claims in Franklin, because we had another storm and our deductible was paid for the year. So those are all things to watch out for. Now in Hoboken, we got our buildings up and running. Our elevators, interestingly, even though they were submerged, ran. But we suspect that because that water was very toxic, it was very salty, and there was a lot of pollutant in the water, we suspect that over time the systems are going to fail prematurely. So even though we got them up and running, we anticipate failure sooner than would have normally occurred. And fortunately in Hoboken, we had a very robust capital reserve account. But Hoboken is not a big district. It's a relatively small district. And the claim is, at last count, it was $2.5 million in damages. So that's a lot to take out of your pocket. Our insurance carrier gave us $250,000, but let me tell you, the vendors who came in want to be paid now when the work is done. They can't wait a year or two. So we paid our vendors. We had already bid all of our vendors, so we had no problem. We knew what the hourly rate for all work was: straight time, time and a half, double time. We had vendors who knew our buildings, and they knew to meet us in person as soon as the flood waters receded at the headquarters. We didn't need cell phones. We didn't need communication. We set it up in advance. As soon as the water's gone, you're going to be here. You're going to be prepared to go evaluate our buildings. We got our buildings, 3 schools inundated with water up and running in 10 days. It was kind of a miracle. And I think it really goes to the credit of the planning of our facilities director and the fact that vendors were already lined up in place before the storm hit. And so if I can share lessons learned with you, planning really is key, and I think really every district would be wise to be a member of a purchasing co-op such as the Middlesex Regional, which bids out all of the vendors, or the Ed Data Co-op, which bids out all vendors, because in an emergency, you know you already have the price quote from the vendor and you're not letting a no-bid contract. All you have to do is go back to your board, have them pass the emergency resolution for the encumbrance that would be over the bid threshold, and you're within the parameters of your audit and of your gap accounting. And those are the parts that get a little fuzzy in an emergency. And so that would be my most important thing as a business administrator to share with other school districts, would be to have the business department, the facilities department very much involved in the planning. The human part of it, the part that my colleagues managed, is the part that tugs our heartstrings, and that's the most important part. But seeing that our staff is paid is also important too, because folks who themselves were flooded really did need their paychecks to go out and buy extra things, and I was very pleased to be able to make that happen.
Okay, Karen, in your different situation in your district.
Yes, Long Beach Island School District, 2 buildings, pre-K through 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and then a bus garage. The week before the storm, basically did some preparedness and was looking forward to getting things done. Called the local high school and asked them if I could move my buses over to the mainland, which I did. And I had, people that said, "Oh, you're being a little bit melodramatic. It's never going to hit." I said, I'd rather be that person in the newspaper that is quoted as moving the buses off the island versus keeping them in my bus garage and then losing all of them. So therefore, that's what I did, and have since had to move my buses over, even after the last storm that we had, the rainstorm. But we worked on preparing for the storm, and gave the teachers the information. We made sure we had all the updated information in our Global Connect system, and sent out a letter to the parents to let them know that their child was bringing home all of their textbooks for the next 2 weeks. Luckily, in our situation, we had off that week prior to, actually during the storm time frame. And then the following week we had to take off. We didn't return back into the building until November 12th, but we did not open the other building and have not opened the building yet. We moved everybody over to the EJ school. Situation there was we were told that it was going to take probably 3 to 6 months in order for the gas lines to be reconnected. They felt that there were some structural problems, and it could take up to 3 to 6 months. So with that said, the EJ school, which is the pre-K through 2 school, it was all electric, and the only section in the building that is not electric was the kitchen. So during the preparedness after the storm, I had vendors coming in and hooking up to electric. Had to buy convection ovens, dishwashers, and so forth that could run off the electric. We got everything up and running. We moved all of the equipment over from the LBI grade school to the EJ school. I ended up, rerouting people and putting teachers on carts, which I did not want to do, but that was what I had to do in order to provide homeroom services to those students. In the middle of all of this, updating the parents throughout the before, during, and after the storm, and parents said that that was their lifeline, that they were not getting information from anywhere else, and that my voice, and I apologized in advance for my nasally voice, and I said, I'm sorry, it's me again, updating you regarding what's happening here on the island. I went over to the island on November 1st with the OEM's permission, and obviously before the storm was in communication with the chiefs of police and the OEM, and contacted them continuously throughout that time period because there was, as our colleagues indicated before, there was some looting going on where boats were coming from the mainland to the island, and obviously we had the National Guard there, we had our police, state police and our local police, and OEM headquarters were set up throughout this whole process. So that's why they were limiting who was coming on the island, going off the island. A lot of our parents' families left the island, but there were a lot of parents and families and students, obviously, that stayed on the island. And if they were to leave the island, they were not going to be able to come back on. So they were very hesitant. In all of this chaos, I reached out to our local district, Stafford Township School District, and met with the superintendent. The superintendent shared that information with the board members on Stafford, and then also reached out with to all of the administrators at Stafford. We had a meeting with regards to the possibility, if we could not get back onto the island, to set up house or shop in the Stafford School District. And the Stafford Township Board of Education was very kind to offer their services, their home, to our schools and our teachers and students in the event we could not get back on. It did not come to that, but we were under the wire because we, I believe Governor Christie came onto the island on Saturday and then lifted the ban so that we can get back on. In the meantime, through all of this, I had my teachers, I communicated with my teachers, my Global Connect. I was getting to about 83% of my parents, as well as I was able to reach out to my staff members. My staff members then reached out to families, and we were able to contact all of our students. In the meantime, parents were continuously emailing me, so my day started at like 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and went sometimes to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning the next day. And it was, I was more concerned about the safety and well-being of my students. I wanted to make sure that all of the families were safe and secure and in a spot that was, that they could get some help if they needed. We did arrive back on the island on November 12th, and we had a little bit of a festival, a little party. We had music blaring. The students were very, very happy to be there, and I had asked the teachers to dress in a casual way, but we were dressing kind of on the same theme to welcome everybody back. We had music playing, and we had obviously newspaper reporters, and Channel 10 and Channel 6 arrived at our doorstep. And the kids really had wanted to try to make it as normal as possible for them when they arrived back to school. They were so anxious to be back in school, so anxious to see all of the teachers, and most importantly, their friends, and that their friends were safe. We kind of prevented a lot of conversation about the storm because it might have wreaked havoc on some of the situations that some of the kids had been put in. Obviously, I had my crisis intervention team available, and my guidance counselor was fortunate enough that she was the dispatcher for one of the local townships, and she was providing me with information throughout everything from start to finish. We arrived back and we ordered modular classrooms. We do not have our modular classrooms because, as you all know, dealing with insurance companies and FEMA, and I have to say FEMA, in my particular case, has been very, very helpful. I have 3 5-inch binders, so I have much documentation to provide to whomever I need to give it to, and if I have to give it multiple times, I'm more than happy to do that. But the FEMA reps have been very, very helpful. I've met with structural engineers because we had to do an analysis of the LBI grade school to see if it was structurally sound. I had a lot of washed out areas around the perimeter of the building, and that was a major concern for us. Because of it being the perfect storm and the ocean and the bay meeting, we are in Long Beach Island. The Ship Bottom School it's really pretty much right on the bay. And obviously our bus garage was, hit pretty hard, and luckily I did not have those buses there. But our unique situation is that our boiler system, transformers, condensers, etc., our security, our phone lines, are all in the basement. There's a 4-foot basement for just that, those items. And as a result of that, everything was destroyed. The roof, the gym floor, and luckily, prior to the storm, I had the teachers, they had just had projectors delivered prior to the storm, and I said, put them up high. To this day, we recouped all of our textbooks because the kids were like holding on to those textbooks in their book bags for dear life, not to lose any, which I was really surprised that we didn't have more textbooks lost as a result of the kids bringing their textbooks home so that I could give them, 2 weeks of work just in case we were in a crisis situation and we could not get back. And to this day, we're working with a project manager and working with FEMA. We are working with mitigation 404 and then working on the 406. As I said to one of the FEMA reps, I said, it kind of goes back to It's a Wonderful Life, where the CPA is in the office of Mr. Potter, and he says, this young man's going to be asking George Bailey for a job one day. Well, I said to the FEMA rep, I said, this woman's going to be asking FEMA for a job one day because I could rattle off category A, B, C, D, so on. And I could tell you exactly what belongs in each category. It's been a really trying, daunting task because we are a small district and there's not much outside help within our schools. But my teachers and my board members have been phenomenal with assisting throughout this crisis. And our kids are really doing well, even though we are kind of we're in one building and we're moving about, we're doing the best we can. In our situation, we had our site plan set up for the south side of our building, which is also a little farther down, farther south, is the helicopter pad for if there is a crisis situation. So we're in discussions with the local municipalities regarding the land use of putting the modular classrooms on the south side of our building. Because Long Beach Island is kind of unique in that the Long Beach Island grade school was for sale prior to the storm. And obviously the economy and the situation on the island, the property, obviously someone who does buy that building really does not want the building, they want the property because it's 4 acres right on the bay. And as a result of that, the price of the property, the value of the property has diminished quite a bit. So we are trying to continue with our feasibility study, the suggestions in our feasibility study to put the addition on the EJ school on the southeast corner of our building. And so we wanted to place the modular classrooms in a place that would not hinder possible construction. And so that's where we are right now, and you know, and just constantly communicating with the mayors of the town, communicating with the OEM. It's ongoing, but preparing for what might come next, because I think in all of the barrier islands, we're in a situation where, in our particular case, the bay has risen about 6 inches. And the storm drains and the sewers are, there's a lot of sand still in there. The township has been working on easements, and they're doing one easement at a time, but we're trying to get back to normal prior, you know, pre-storm, but it's going to take a little time. We've had a lot of parents who have lost their homes. Devastated. They lost everything. I have a lot of faculty members who have lost everything. So the expectations to have them reach out to parents during this crisis as well, they had no way of doing that. So all of my faculty members who lived on the mainland did assist in this endeavor to reach out to everyone and to connect with 100% of the parents and the students. We had originally about 125 displaced families. We are down to about 38, and I have to commend the New Jersey School Boards Association for reaching out to so many people for donations. Our donations are still coming in, and it is phenomenal to see the outpouring of compassion, generosity, and support for our families and our students. The parents, you know, the first group of people that arrived at our doorstep was from Upper Montgomery Public Schools, and they put together backpacks for all of my students. They brought about 12 students down from Montgomery, and they basically handed out a backpack to each of the students, and the students were like, "Can I take that one? Because I like that one better." And they said, "You can take any backpack you want." So, I mean, those are just examples. I mean, the Long Beach Island Grade School, although it is not it's not operational right now, we had American Red Cross come in, and the entire gym was filled to capacity. We were using the south wing area in that building to basically store heaters for our families, other supplies, and everything went, and whatever we did not use, we sent up to Toms River and to Brick. So I thank all of you and anyone who sent us anything. For your support and your compassion and your unyielding effort that went into putting all of this together. At this point right now, we are trying to get things back together. The board has has been dealing with a lot of situations, and we're trying to make a fiscally responsible decision as to what is going to happen to that building. Because, as you all know, the insurance will only cover so much, and our budget is very limited. If we fix that particular building, insurance, the dollar figure is a little different. And also then FEMA kicks in. We had to keep track of all of the overtime that went into getting things up and running. Manning the American Red Cross. Our bus drivers brought people to shelters, so we had that in place and ready to go. And throughout this whole time, our OEM director, Long Beach Township, as well as Chief Collins for Surf City and Lieutenant Jack Casella, really kept me informed as to what was going on and what we needed to do to be in that to correct the problem. The National Guard was phenomenal. They set up camp on the Surf City EJ property. And they asked for permission, because they do have to ask for permission for the helicopters to land on the field adjacent to the EJ school. So obviously that was granted, because we had a lot of vendors coming in from all over the country, working on homes and trying to restore us to and get us on the road to recovery. And they were, there were some really critical issues that occurred with people working on homes and on different buildings on the island. So trying to think if there's anything else.
All right.
Thank you.
Lisa, you're in Keyport, and I know you work closely with Union Beach because they suffered a lot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Joe Annabali is sorry that he can't be here today, but he is kind of jack of all trades. Essentially, Keyport and Union Beach are, I'm about a mile, 1.4 square miles, and he is probably about the same, or maybe 1.9. We are receiving relationship. Half of my high school are Union Beach students. So they're two tight-knit communities prior to this unfortunate circumstance. The Saturday before the storm, I decided to break my wrist. So I don't know, what can I tell you, taking the qualifying exam. So anyway, I leave the exam, and yes, I did finish the exam. I leave the exam and I go to the OEM meeting, where my director of buildings and grounds is also the OEM coordinator, who's also the first aid chief. So it's like the Bob Newhart show, my Daryl, my other brother Daryl. So I went to that meeting and I held my arm up. I said, "Is it broken?" He's like, "I don't know." I said, "Okay." So we went to the hospital and they wrapped it. Said, "Come back on Monday. You're going to get a cast." Great. Why not my right hand? Yes, it was. That didn't happen on Monday, nonetheless, because everything was closed. So long story short, Tuesday morning, I walk into my elementary school with my husband and my children. I do fortunately I live in Hazlet, which is between Union Beach and Keyport, so I'm right there to check on the building. And my director of building and grounds says to me, "I'm really sorry I didn't call, but last night we had to put 150 senior citizens in the elementary school." It was 3 a.m. I figured it wasn't going to change anything. There they were. So that was definitely not anticipated, and we were not set up to be a shelter. I didn't go home that day. And I have to say, as a parent, I felt like I did a good job with my children, because I have 2 girls, and girls are very interesting creatures. So I did find that as a mommy, I did a better job than I thought, because they were far more compassionate to senior citizens than they are to each other. So on that note, we spent a lot of time there, and I would say to you, my experience, I probably was the one, right, who did say that soup school, they didn't teach me that. I had no idea what I was walking into. However, I see my gentleman, friend Kenny, who's the OEM gentleman, and my director of facilities, and he's spinning. I said, "Go, go, I've got it." By the end of the night, we had 150 cots. We used our Facebook page, our Twitter. We have Gmail. Since then, we have also set up Gmail accounts for all of our students from within the district. It's a secure network where they can email teachers and teachers can email them, so we will always be able to have contact with them. But on that note, we essentially created a shelter. Governor Christie can come down and we'll show him how it's done, because I have to say to you, I had no idea what I was doing. However, as the superintendent of schools, I think they think that you just know it all, and you know what, we did pull it off. With the credit of my students, staff, community members, it was unlike any other experience. And let me tell you, talk about an education. Those students got an education. I mean, we built a pet room, we built a distribution center, we had laundry, we had, it was intense. It was really, I was so very proud of all of them, dealing with all those displaced people. And then with Union Beach hit as well, people started to show up and tell me how you turn away, a senior citizen with their pet or a family. Absolutely not. We did what we needed to do. We ran a central hub in the front of the elementary school, and ironically enough, I now know why I kept POTS lines, because that was phenomenal to have a POTS line, because that was where we took all the calls through. A year ago, I wouldn't have known what that was. Now I do, because we had just done our phone system, but we just kept those lines, so we were able to communicate everything. We, food service company, used whatever we needed to use, we used. We had Boy Scouts who volunteered to cook, so we had a chef coordinator, if you will. It was phenomenal. So not unlike some of the other experiences my colleagues have had, but I personally, we weren't designed to be that. So I had no idea. That was not in my emergency crisis plan. However, wouldn't have traded it for the world. We had people from different states, different towns. It was amazing. Probably the next morning, Wednesday morning, I had the chief of police take me through Keyport and through Union Beach, and that was where I ran into Mr. Annabali. Directly wanted to go sit with him. He was in his parking lot because his building was uninhabitable, and Salvation Army, all the resources were all around him, and all I said to him is, please remember one thing, Joe, whatever you need, we're here. It's kind of like, unfortunately, when you have a death or something such as that, you go up and you pay your respects. You just need that person to remember that one statement, I'm here. And within a couple of days, we had called the, I'm telling you, Monmouth County, we're phenomenal, we're very fortunate. Mr. Passman was in Africa. However, Mr. Flora stepped up, got all the soups together, and I'm telling you, I was a hot mess with the cast up to here. I don't know, they said I would move around. It was my wrist. So I'm driving down to Neptune, and they're all, of course, my colleagues are a little relentless and had quite a little fun chuckling. So we coordinated everything together. We were doing Google Docs, and I used that example for when we started to collect our students, if you will. We created a Google document. I shared it with Joe's admin team. I told them, you worry about your elementary kids, we'll take the high school kids. And we got a meeting together not too long after the SOUP meeting, and at which we invited Todd Flora. We got all the reps there, my board president said, okay, we need to talk. You know what, Joe, you just need to hear whatever it is, like what do you need, where are you headed? We were considering a staggered schedule, but we decided that he had St. Catherine's. So could I take the middle school students? Absolutely, not a thought. His children, as 8th graders, get to select Keyport or Red Bank. Out of that tragedy, did they get to experience some great things in my district? Yes, I hope so. I hope they got to get comfortable. But throughout that, we coordinated transportation, supplies, parking, nursing. Keyport is a very, parking is a premium. So I would tell you that, you know, I knew that I wanted these people to come in and be received well. I am a walking district. I do not deal with transportation except for special education students. So, and Joe has 2 buses that he would take my high school students over to, but again, it was coordinating all those displaced people. I was fortunate that primarily it was about 15 families for me that were across from the senior citizen complex that received about 5 foot of water. I was lucky that there were not as many of my families. However, he had to come up with transportation, and we had to work on coordinating modified days, things of that capacity. Nobody was prepared to transport all these students. And then closing the shelter and getting prepared for them to come through. Unfortunately, we did have to work out with the seniors. The one building was not going to open. We were school counselors, if you will. We were calling family, making arrangements, emptying it, and getting prepared for the Union Beach students to come. Teachers, amazing. Staff, like amazing. I called my union president. Could you call Union Beach's union president and make sure they get what they need? They lost everything. One of the things we did as the NJEA, Saturday night, here we were in the dark, you know, loading backpacks and getting things ready for those students and teachers to come. My staff is amazing, his staff is amazing. The kids are probably, they deserve the most credit. They're resilient. Off they came, and it has almost been, like there's maybe one, I had one parent complaint, one. Okay, that's unlike no other. I had more because when we opened the schools, they felt that they were not sanitary from having pets. And I was like, seriously? Okay, we got through it, we moved forward. Joe's kids have been with me since, I want to say November 19th. And I don't think they're leaving us before the end of the year. And I told him that point blank, let them stay. We're not charging rent. And I couldn't imagine doing that. I don't know, it just didn't seem like the right thing to do. I know that a lot of people are getting scrutinized over what they charge. It's irrelevant to me. Those kids needed a place to go. And my board most certainly said they supported my decision to not charge anything for them to be there. Joe and I have worked with things like nursing services, paper, because on top of it, he's operating his district now. He has his pre-K in his board office, which is a small building attached to that. He has his 6, 7, and 8 with me, and he has the other students. They moved from St. Catherine's to now Holy Family, because Holy Family was where the National Guard was. So on top of it, he's moving people left and right. But he took my sub-nurse, because he's operating those buildings. I'm like, hey, so, you know, like, wait a minute, I need some help here. We work together, paper, whatever it is. I really have to say I am very, very fortunate to work with Joe. It's all about the kids, and believe me, we could be very competitive as 2 small districts We're not. We're very honest with each other, and we know the deal. Our technology, we gave them spots on our website because they were not operational for a very long time, and I think they're still not in terms of what they can access. I do know they've had donations from a variety of different sources. However, we put teacher pages up. We created logins for their students to our infrastructure, all of those things. Commissioner Cerf came in one day, wanted to talk to all of them. Some people, you know, when he made the tour through the Bayshore, I don't know, we just felt like we wanted him to meet with the kids. We didn't have any fanfare. We just literally wanted him to sit with the children and see where they are. We currently have a helping committee in place that everybody knows to contact for different things, because again, I agree with everyone else who's spoken. You get so many things, it has to be strategic and systemic. So I would absolutely say, please don't take this offensively, but keep your donations for now, because this is not going away for these kids. They may need money for college applications. They may need money for clothes. They may need money for the prom, whatever it is. This is such a long process. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to George Scott from the Traumatic Loss Coalition. They have been phenomenal with us. We met them last year, unfortunately, when we lost 2 students in a week, which is, again, something I didn't expect to experience, by all fairness. He came in, he supported my counseling staff, making sure those resources are. It's really like you're Jack and Jane of all trades. I couldn't, you know, and from the BA perspective, you know, not knowing, okay, great, my OEM gentleman's my buildings and grounds guy. Kenny, you're not doing this. Who's your next guy in line? Make them write down everything. Because again, you don't know what you're gonna do with it. And I have utmost more respect and appreciation for my business administrator than I did before, because they're the ones who are helping me put it all together. It can't happen without the 2 of you joining. And I think that when you can have a good working relationship like that, I've had it good and I've had it bad. Much easier to have it good. But on that note, keeping records, keeping those hours, going through your contract. I do say that when we opened up on Martin Luther and President's Day, I was a little crotchety because the custodians wanted to be paid double time. I'm not gonna lie, I was. I had to get over it, and I did, but I most certainly communicated to the union president of that collective bargaining unit that I get it, I'm not happy, we'll do it. I really think we should play more nicely in the sandbox next time. But again, you have to get past that, because that stuff will eat you alive. In terms of Union Beach, I want to say Joe has approximately 40 students who are still displaced in his district. Some of them are my students. We actually had one that moved in the middle of it. And whose kid is it? Okay, whatever, we're transporting those kids, we're getting them back down into the community. As a superintendent with a budget, I'm very nervous about what the ratables are going to be. In Keyport, it was primarily businesses. I want to say we went down 2%. Which I only have a $19.5 million budget. So on that note, that is impacting. For us, it was more for businesses. For Joe, definitively more in his ratables in his homes. You know, they were so many of them were so, again, that video, nothing, walking, you know, people, you're in the room, you get it. I was very fortunate that I lived right between the 2 towns, and I lost, you know, cosmetic things. It was absolutely, you know, nothing near. Working those 20-hour days, just doing. We're just doers. I think that's probably why I'm going to take that back, that can-do supportive people. We're can-do people. It is not about us. It is about the kids. And it was really, again, when I lost the 2 kids, one to a suicide last year and one to a car accident, I hated that experience. But being with those kids and being in the classrooms with them, that was amazing. And that's why we do what we do. And in terms of where we're going from the future, we're currently dealing with testing, how we're going to prepare and test Union Beach's kids with ours. Can we delay? What can we do to help those kids take those tests? And reopening Memorial School. He is not unlike others in the room. I am fortunate enough to just really have to help coordinate a lot of that stuff. Our school was intact, but working with Joe and those students for that long-term outcome. I mean, that scares me, I have to say to you, for the students and for my district as well, because if those ratables aren't there, if they're not a house to pay for, many people are making the decision to walk away. Some of them were upside down to begin with, depending on when they bought. And again, just providing those resources for those students and possibly having to modify my policy, if I can, to allow seniors who have attended the school to finish. That may take me to consider that, because there are some students that are going to want to finish. So I don't know that my story really is much different than anybody else. We do what we do because we enjoy what we do. Unlike any experience that in the 4 years as a superintendent that I've had between the $1 million with Governor Christie year one, that was a treat. And park and an evaluation and all those things don't go away. You're still preparing for all of those things, but I have to say to you, I couldn't be more proud to be part of a community that pulled together the way they did. It was unlike any other experience. So that really is all I have to share.
And I only have time for like one question.
POTS. You said POTS. I'm so glad I had it. You know what it was before? I have no idea what it is.
A POTS on his telephone line that it is not a part of my system. I kept some established phone lines when we implemented, put in the new infrastructure for the phone and the computers, and that was working when other things weren't. So the POTS lines were
old
telephone. Oh, is that what it is? I have no idea what acronym. There was no word wall for that.
POTS.
It's a kind of plugs in the wall.
All right. We don't really have much time for questions. They went a little longer. Does anyone have any final before I close up?
I just have one question for all of you, actually, because you've spoken so much about how the community is rallied together. Only a couple of you made one mention about kind of dealing with your own family throughout the process. And obviously, you have a lot of staff. One thing that I faced was I had a lot of my building administrators whose families were, whose homes were completely under and destroyed, and they're playing a role.
That's true.
So how did you find that balance with those who you knew, who were your leaders in your buildings, who were dealing with their own, if we were not affected as much, we could really dedicate ourselves to, but if you were dealing with administrators who you need to step up, but at the same time, they're
That was a conflict. I'm going to tell you, because a lot of my administrators had no electric. And I mean, again, I'm lucky. 90% of the times it's great that I live so close. 10% of the time it isn't. But because you can't go to the grocery store or reprimand your children. You have to even if you're driving in town, it's complex. But anyway, working with all of the staff members that were there, a lot of my staff members, again, we employ them. I didn't have as many of my administrators were not local, which. It was what it was, but that's when we created the Google Doc and things like that. As far as incorporating my children into it, I have to say to you, there are times where and my kids attend school locally, and they know that whatever they do is, even as a leader, whatever they do impacts our family. So they don't always love it. However, I have to say to you, working with the kids and having them see my students, that was a really big benefit for them. And again, seeing that you didn't fail as two girls or so on that note, it was a great experience. I have to say to you, the boundaries were there and people were respectful of those boundaries.
All right, Walter.
30 seconds. I had 2 administrators lose their homes completely. The 3 days after when I called the administrators to get it, they came to the meeting. They came right back into the school, and I've given them pretty much carte blanche whenever they need to meet with whenever they need to meet with the insurance company, where they have to go. We're extremely flexible, but we did that with all the employees, because if they don't have any personal days left, I went to the union and I said, I will allow them to take the sick days, but you have to make accommodations. I have 1,700 employees. I have many that lost everything, but because they're that dedicated, they never raised the rent. They didn't ask for it, they just came. So we sent our football players over there to tear out their house. They ripped everything out, all the insulation and all. The kids were phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of support that's pretty good.
Cassie, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Okay, well,
No, I'm going to have the last word, but I'm going to have the next last word.
But I do have to say that, I work for the association, and I'm the field service rep for all of these districts that are in Hallman, and half of the ones in Ocean that have been directly impacted by the storm. My heart breaks when I go into these districts and I hear the stories of what everybody has experienced. But what I have seen happen in these districts as I go in to work with them now, every single one of the boards of education are amazing. Every single one of the administrators really need to be thanked beyond belief for the jobs that they are doing to make our children be safe and secure. I think they've all done such a tremendous job, and I am so proud to be able to work with these districts whenever I go in. I mean, I just really have to say it, because these are, I feel, my people. And, you know, they are part of me, and they are making me be very proud of what I do. I mean, I really thank you all.
Thank you. To echo what Kathy was talking about, I got an opportunity, because I was coordinating our outreach. I got to talk to the administrators, which is why I invited a lot of them here. And it was just, I think you have to hear the experience from them firsthand to understand what they were going through. And as I said before, I think a school administrative job, and any job in education is hard, but it's hard to be a school administrator. But with what you had to deal with, I think just it made it almost impossible. But it wasn't impossible, because they really got the kids back in school. They figured out solutions to everything. I just want to, you know, this was lessons learned on Sandy. I just want to, what I heard, I'm going to tell you what I heard that would help all districts. A, plan ahead. All the districts planned ahead before the storm hit. They were talking to their municipality. They were talking with each other. They set a plan. They expected the worst, and it was worse than they expected. But that was a lesson I think that they got out of it, and I think all of us could learn about. Communication is key. That now you have to have multiple ways of communicating. They're talking about Gmail, different servers. You were talking about Facebook and Twitter, and thinking ahead on that, so that you can't rely on one way of communicating with your parents and your staff members. Record keeping, because you're going to need those records probably for a long time. Because I just need a question. Has anyone received any funds from FEMA or the insurance yet?
We have.
We have.
But that seems to be a really important thing, and that's something that you plan ahead. Prepare for the long haul. You know, for a lot of us, the minute the lights came on, the storm kind of went away. But for a lot of you, and as we look at this, this is not, it's still there. And I think it's important that we have things like this so that we can help them. We didn't even get into the rateable base. I mean, I think that's
another
that's a whole day. And I think, and Lisa McKeon, but there's other districts working cooperatively with the other districts. You know, sometimes districts we get, you know, they feel we're all isolated and we have our own kingdoms. But what I saw throughout this is districts work together. They just, one superintendent would call another, and they said, whatever you want. Teachers would all come down. They all helped each other, and that was really important. And then I guess the last thing that I was just, I was actually inspired by everyone, in dealing with everyone, like, you know, Lisa and, you know, David and Carol and everyone. I was inspired by the work that they did. And I think we should all be inspired by them. And I want to thank them all for coming and sharing their ideas. And I'm actually going to work on something so we get these ideas out to more people. And as I said before, we'll send you some of the information from Belmar out as to what they're doing. And I hope you got something out of this to take home to your district. And I'd like to thank you all for coming.
Thank you.